My project, which I refer to as the Fall of Little Saigon, focuses on an area of Arlington, Virginia, the Clarendon neighborhood, that was, for a short period from 1975 till about the mid-1980s, occupied by Vietnamese refugees fleeing the fall of Saigon. My research question on this path is, what can be learned about forced migration, both in terms of gentrification and transnational migration, from a community that has undergone both in a very short time period? The Clarendon neighborhood was once a thriving business center of Arlington, Virginia, once its de facto downtown district. It was a thriving business district which declined after the 1950s because a large shopping mall elsewhere in the county opened that was more convenient for local residents. Rents lowered extremely in the mid to late 1970s, which created an opportunity for incoming Vietnamese merchants. After Saigon fell in 1975, the first wave of South Vietnamese immigrants who arrived in the Arlington area were generally well educated and often had ties with the U.S. government. They included lawyers and engineers, high-ranking officers, and war brides, according to Kim O'Connell, as phrased in her book, Echoes of Little Saigon. These are the people who established the thriving Vietnamese business community on Wilson Boulevard and in the surrounding Clarendon neighborhood. I believe this relates to conversations we've had about highly educated and professional refugees who often have a difficult time getting back into their field when they arrive in a new country. I have found this not to be the case in my research for these particular Vietnamese refugees. Once Little Saigon was established, a second wave of South Vietnamese immigrants fleeing violence in Vietnam came in. As Kim O'Connell states, quote, an estimated 80,000 people fled Vietnam by boat between 1975 and 1995, and between 10 and 50% of these second-wave refugees are thought to have perished during their voyage from Vietnam, from drowning, starvation, piracy and murder, and other causes. I relate this desperation to our readings of Sin Nombre, Riding La Bestia, and the Burns and Novick documentary. Once these people arrived, they needed a place. As Hein Duc Doc wrote in his book, The Vietnamese Americans, quote, the cradle of traditional Vietnamese society was the village. This consisted of family ties, kinship ties, creating a functioning support network among refugees, and generally fostering a community where Vietnamese traditions could be carried forward. This reminded me a lot of our discussions of Jane Jacobs and her discussion of Italian communities and how those are established over a long period of time and create a sense of belonging for Italian immigrants. This is the same way for these Vietnamese immigrants. Additionally, the opportunity to practice traditional food and dress, I related back to our readings of Mintz and Miller. O'Connell said, in Arlington, that village atmosphere, those family ties, that sense of community, would be created in Clarendon. Refugees echoed her sentiment. One, Toa Do, said, quote, there's a coffee shop that is selling coffee with the condensed milk. And then if you sit there and you listen to the Vietnamese music and bring your coffee, you feel like you're back in Saigon again if you close your eyes. Generally, Little Saigon was a very tight-knit community. Vietnamese from all around the world would sit, children in the area would grow up together, and traditional cultural ceremonies such as the Lunar New Year Festival would be celebrated as a group. This was their home away from home. Additionally, this was a place where they could recount the fall of Saigon and have emotional reunions with people who they had not seen since departing from Vietnam, as in a sympathizer. Even though, as Haynes, Rutherford, and Thomas put it, quote, it is probable that Vietnamese businesses have contributed to the restoration of economic vitality in this once decaying neighborhood, in reference to Clarendon, reactions by the Arlington community were mixed. Some were welcoming. Refugees were provided a variety of public services. Students were offered English language classes in their schools. And official bodies, such as the City Council, recognized the rights of the Vietnamese refugees. However, some reactions were more negative. Prior to the arrival of the Vietnamese refugees, many shops closed down in response to economic downturn, as I mentioned earlier, the greater availability of a more auto-oriented shopping mall in another part of the county put a lot of people out of business. And their business was pushed out by poor foot traffic. And then these same former business owners in the area were resentful when Vietnamese found success in their absence. Their hopes for revitalization of Clarendon was for a renewal of their urban heyday when the Clarendon Metro finally finished in 1979. Census data and business records clearly show the flow of Vietnamese in and then back out of the Clarendon area. As O'Connell stated, quote, "It is a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Within a finite period, the Vietnamese arrived, they worked and lived in or near Arlington, and they largely moved on as the new metro rail system, rising rents, and development projects gradually displaced Little Saigon. Refugees responded to this gentrification with profound sadness. As one, Kim Cook, stated, quote, "They felt sad. The ones who helped set it up felt like we were losing our country the second time. The first location we had as a community in America was gone." Ultimately, the story of Little Saigon magnifies themes we have seen in gentrification and forced migration all year long, and highlights what we have learned are similarities between the two. Themes of desperation, loss of home, survival, and the idea of assimilation versus preservation in terms of culture in the midst of displacement carry through for both. This story is one of many dark themes, but there is some hope. In the mid-'80s, as Vietnamese were being pushed out of the Clarendon Strip, business owners on Wilson Boulevard and the surrounding area were able to pool money they had saved during their successful run to purchase a failing supermarket in nearby Falls Church, Virginia. This purchase allowed them to create a new cultural center for Vietnamese in the entirety of Arlington County to continue their traditions and share in their culture. As Quang Kevin Lee stated, quote, "I have very fond memories of Little Saigon. It was really the genesis of this community. Arlington has such a rich history for the Vietnamese. But we're still here. We're just 5 miles down the road." Additionally, ongoing reporting into the 90s, 2000s, and even today shows that Little Saigon left a permanent imprint on the culture of Virginia, Arlington, and the Clarendon area, even post-gentrification. My closing question is simply this: will the traditions that Little Saigon helped to preserve continue? Quang Kevin Lee, who came to Arlington to Little Saigon as a child with his family after Saigon fell, said this, quote, "We are the children of the first generation, and we've gone through a cycle of American history. Every immigrant community that blossoms, eventually then, they blend in with the general public. The children of the first generation are grown now, and we have to decide if we want to continue those traditions." In closing, I'll leave you with a quote from Ocean Vuong, from a letter to my mother that she will never read. "The monarchs that fly south will not make it back north. Each departure, then, is final. Only their children return. Only the future revisits the past." Thank you.